Okay, I have now seen this episode 6 of The Wheel of Time, twice through, and I am going to try to provide some additional commentary about why this episode doesn't hit doesn't hit right. And it's not because it's a deviation from the books. We've seen several episodes in a row now that deviate pretty seriously from the books. I didn't have issues with those episodes. Episode 4 I felt was really worthwhile because we don't really have an action scene in the Eye of the World canon material. So adding something like an Aes Sedai battle with Logain's followers, which was happening concurrently at the time, felt like a good addition. That made sense to me. And then following with the aftermath of the Aes Sedai bond with their warders, their grieving process, the really exciting scenes with Egwene and Perrin and the White Cloaks, all of that hit really well too. Episode 6, though, is not a bad episode, but it's a little bit of a lower rated episode for me than some of the episodes we've had thus far. And I've been thinking about trying to figure out why is this? And I think the biggest issue I'm having with this episode is that it's not advancing the plot. And we have now had, I would argue, 2 episodes in a row where the plot didn't feel like it was being advanced. I don't mean that we're not focused on the essential confrontation with the Dark One. They drop that a couple of times in this episode, and we do get some information that takes us to the Eye of the World via the Ways. But that information felt secondary to the things that were the focus of this episode, which was, Moiraine getting in trouble, sort of, and tension in the tower, and the Ajas not getting along, and introduction to Swan Sanche. And although I expected all of those things in this episode, I didn't expect the entire episode to be about that. I thought we were going to focus more on Rand and Matt this episode, who barely got any screen time in the last episode. I thought we'd focus more on Perrin, who has gone through this I might be a wolf thing, and at the beginning of the episode is shown lying prone and thinking deeply, and at the end of the episode seems fine, and no one talked to him. And so it just feels like the real story is happening on the sidelines of this episode, and instead the camera is focused on Moiraine and all of her feelings and history and ambitions and goals. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in a show where you have enough time to do kind of vignettes of characters throughout a larger plot arc. But I feel like we don't have that time for the season 1 of The Wheel of Time, so I'm not really sure why this time is being spent in this way during this episode, unless, I don't know, something crazy happens at the end of this season that is not in the books. Something might happen to Moiraine at the end of this season. Now I'm wondering if they're going to depose Swan Sanche, like at the end of season 1, which would have all kinds of cascading effects for the future of the story. So I'm just kind of at a loss about what is the story about? Is the story about Moiraine, or is this story about the Dragon Reborn? Because it's starting to feel like a story about Moiraine, and I don't know how they can end it in a satisfying way in only 2 episodes. We've spent, now 2.5 episodes on things that don't lead us to the Eye of the World. So I'm going to give some credit to people that have been complaining in online internet channels that their opinions of this have been sidelined because everyone wants to be a cheerleader for the show. I am still a cheerleader for the show. I am enjoying The Wheel of Time overall, but I do have to give a nod in the direction of, we've now spent quite a few hours on plot lines that don't feel like they're thematically important this season, unless the ending of season 1 is dramatically different than anticipated, which would then throw the whole storyline into question. So I'm still open to it. We're going to see what happens in subsequent episodes, but just a little hard to understand why they made certain choices this episode. I want to dig into some of the things that I noticed and kind of round out the pros and cons list. Starting with the opening prologue with Young Swan. I like that they showed Young Swan. I think she's a a great additional kind of backstory character, but I didn't feel that that prologue had any impact, like really any real significant impact on the story for this chapter. It seems like they could have done more with that. I would have preferred to see, Swan's doting father turn against her the second he realizes she can channel, and all the villagers to throw her in a boat and send her to the tower as a complete reject of their society based on her ability to channel. That would have been more interesting and also given us, I think, more sympathy for that character. The way they set it up with her having a loving father, that's not a bad thing. I like having characters that have loving fathers, but to my knowledge, Swan's father is not a character that we should care about or somebody that's going to reappear in the story anytime soon or really ever. So I just don't know why that much attention needed to be spent on that. I can see attention being spent more on how reviled channelers are in certain parts of the world. We did get that with the dragon fang scrawled on her burned down door, but I think that whole scene could have been more gut-wrenching, and it seems like it was just a little bit easy. They went home and their house was burned down, and it's like, oh, well, I guess you gotta row yourself to the tower in a boat. And it's like, okay. And her father's telling her that she's strong as the tides. I would have liked to have the story show me that and not tell me that. So it would have been much more interesting if that was like a voiceover of her hearing her father tell her, you're strong as the tides, while people try to murder her in an alley for being able to channel, and her escaping that situation. That would have been a lot more interesting to witness than what they actually showed us. Pros for this episode, I loved the Aes Sedai's Sunday best clothes. I think that those costumes are an improvement over the traveling clothes that we have seen to date, although a lot of the dresses still look uncomfortable to me. I think a lot of the problems I'm having with some of the costumes is that some of them look like things that you wouldn't want to wear. But Moiraine's dress was an exception to that. It looked really great. And I actually liked Alana's dress a lot too. Things I loved. Lyanna's face. Lyanna, the Keeper of the Chronicles, who holds the staff and says, she comes, she comes. I think it's her only line. But go watch this episode again and just look at her expressions. They are ace. Like, I think she is just doing a great job of just like showing us a character that is so contemptuous of everyone and such strong facial expressions. Loved that. Loved everything that Lyanna did. I liked Logain asking to die in this episode. We're probably not going to get a whole lot of opportunity to see him again in subsequent seasons until he does something more interesting. We'll see. But that whole scene could have been a little quicker, but I think it worked okay to show us the role of the Amyrlin passing judgment, and for Logain to try to get her to kill him by insulting her, and her being unfazed by that and telling him that he's essentially going to, be there as an example forever. Although I didn't like her line that he would remain there until he loses himself to the madness. That doesn't make any sense. Since he's been gentled, he should not be any madder than he already is in the future. So I don't actually know what that's referencing. The challenges of tower politics were conveyed appropriately. I just didn't know they had to spend a whole episode on it. Speaking of which, Perrin does nothing in this episode. Rand does almost nothing in this episode. Mat gets healed from the dagger, at least temporarily, and then we have that nutty scene at the end, but he doesn't otherwise do anything. I would have liked to have seen a recovery scene with him. I would especially like to see him, crack a joke or let us know that he can't remember that time period while he held the dagger. And maybe this will come to bear in future episodes, assuming the character remains in the story. Because that was a motivating factor for Mat in Royaden. He can't remember the time period that transpired when he had the dagger. And in this version of the story, Mat is worried that he murdered that little girl and the farmstead family during the travels with Rand. He's not sure if it was him or the Fade. So I can see that really gnawing on him and being like a difficult memory to access because he was not himself when he held the dagger, and to be searching for the answers to that. And that could set up some good plot points for him to, ask for his memories back in a creepy elfin world. So I'd like to see that, but we haven't seen it yet. I also didn't like the comment that Matt has some super strength, which enabled him to withstand the dagger, unless they just mean general sense of character. And then saying it was like reacting to the darkness in him as much as anything else. Again, this has to do with how they've changed the characters for this version of A Wheel of Time, where Matt is the son of a drunk and a philanderer and is a thief to boot. And his only redeeming quality is loving his sisters and, being essentially an okay friend to Rand and Perrin, who I guess don't know that he steals. I don't know. The implications that he has like some deep darkness gnawing within him that he has to conquer, that the dagger speaks to, is I don't know what they're going to do with that. Maybe it'll be really interesting. I don't know if they're going to be able to do something with it by the end of the season. So I don't know what that means. The nudity that they showed in the bath scene, I didn't love that, but I didn't hate it. It was just a bath scene. I think if you reacted negatively to that, you probably just don't like nudity in general. But I would say, like, The Wheel of Time is not supposed to be like Game of Thrones, where it's like a gratuitous, overly sexualized show. But there is nudity in The Wheel of Time, and it tends to be treated as natural. So I think that this scene actually demonstrates and captures some of that, where we see just people being people, except that they're naked. And that does happen, especially among the Aiel. And in Feldara, we might see the men and women climbing into baths together. That's something that happens in that culture and was probably intentionally alluded to in that first episode when Moiraine and Lan bathe together. And we just see them with their clothes off, and it's like no big thing. I think that's supposed to be an ode to that culture, which we will hopefully get to see next episode. Let's see. I love the tea room where Moiraine sits for a while, where she's contemplating all of the different competing priorities that she's trying to balance. That tea room just looked amazing. I also love that they showed that she had eyes and ears within the Tarvalin city, and that they were all communicating with her about where Egwene and Perrin were, about where Loial was, about Nynaeve was doing. Like, Moiraine was showed to be playing the game of houses in this episode. And I'm pretty sure that was part of the point of this episode. I just don't know how that ties into the overall plot of the Eye of the World. It would make more sense to do that, I don't know, later, unless they're going to do something at the end of the show that I'm not anticipating. So we'll have to see. I also liked that Lan mentioned that she had masked the bond, and this was right before she goes into the room with Swan. So obviously Moiraine is planning to have a little lovers reunion and doesn't want Lan to experience that, but she plays it off. And even though those two are really close, it doesn't seem like he knows about that relationship, or if he does, he hadn't guessed that was the reason that she did that. But it's a nice little drop that A, I said I can mask the bond, and B, that she was about to go reunite with Swan Sanche. The Ter'an'greal that Moiraine uses to reach Swan was really interesting. I liked the magic that was shown with that. It's obviously, to my knowledge at least, not a Ter'an'greal that we know about from the books. And it seems to be taking her to a room that's like a dream world version of Swan's bedroom or Swan's office. So I think they actually are in tel'aran'rhiod, or in some kind of a pocket dimension that is reflective of tel'aran'rhiod when they're in that room. They also drop that little bit of information that Swan is a dreamer in this version of the series, and she is the one, surprise, to give the information about the Eye of the World being in jeopardy. But I think it's okay that Swan is shown to be the dreamer in this version of the story. I hope it's I hope that she is a dreamer in addition to Egwene and not instead of it. I don't mind that Swan has dreamer abilities in this version of the story. She doesn't in the books, not natural dreamer abilities. Egwene is I think the only Aes Sedai character we see that has dreamer abilities. Swan does learn to dream walk in the books, and it happens, spoilers, pause, it happens after she is deposed, stilled, and stripped of stolen staff. So she loses all of her power, all of her magical ability, all of her authority, all of her money, everything, and dream walking is one of the things that she picks up to try to rebuild her life. And they can still have that happen with her being a dreamer, because dreamers and dream walkers are not the same thing. It's the same reason that Egwene becomes interested in dream walking, so having another character be able to do it, it's fine. So we'll see how that evolves, because I really don't know where the story is going, but that's something. I did like that they mentioned the possibility of them being stilled, and we'll see if people who have not read the books pick up on that reference and what it means. I'm hoping that they do. I also didn't mind the on your knees turnabout joke. That got a little bit of a chuckle from me. I'm sure other people laughed too. It was fine. I did appreciate that Moiraine and Swan have this, heart to heart in her bedroom about their priorities and their goals and what they're trying to accomplish. So, but the foundations of it were very unclear, at least for a book reader. I'm going to have to watch react videos from people who have not read the books to see how this information lands, but I thought it was kind of confusing. So they haven't really explained what the Dark One is, and frankly, the story never does. But referencing that he's weak right now, but getting stronger, implies that his strength varies over time, and there's no mechanism that is supplied to suggest that that is the case. So I don't know what that means. Why would he be weak now, but getting stronger? Like, what is that referencing? And then I thought we had more time is a weird thing to say to Moiraine. Like, Swan is hoping that Moiraine can stay in Tar Valon longer, but she says that right after suggesting that the Eye of the World is in jeopardy and they need to go there immediately in order to confront the Dark One. So I thought that was a weird scripting choice. It just didn't make sense. I did like that Swan called Moiraine a pufferfish, because any references to fish are perfect from Swan. I loved the scene when Moiraine confronted, or I should say, Liandrin confronted Moiraine that she knew all of her secrets, and then Moiraine told her that she knows her one very important secret about the man at North Harbor. I have no idea what that secret is. If that's dropped somewhere earlier and you can put it in the comments, but it definitely made Liandrin shut up, and it demonstrated that Moiraine is better at this than Liandrin, which of course she is, because she was raised in the palace of HEREIN. You also might have picked up on Loyal looking taller this episode. Like, it almost seems like they discovered some additional ways to use camera tricks to make him seem taller in this episode than they did in the last episode. Or they weren't deliberately trying to make him seem taller in the last episode because he was only seen with Rand, and Rand is supposed to be tall. That doesn't quite make enough that much sense to me, so I'm going to go with they learned some camera tricks in between filming season or episode 5 and episode 6, because he definitely seems taller in episode 6. Let's see, the meeting with the Amyrlin seat and Nynaeve and Egwene and Moiraine is standing in the background. That whole scene lacked fire for me. It just wasn't very interesting. Like, why were they brought before the Amyrlin? What was the purpose of that? It seems like Moraine's just trying to manipulate everybody to get them to go to the Eye of the World with her, and for some reason, meeting the Amyrlin seat impresses upon them their, role in things, and so they're gonna agree to do their duty. It landed kind of flat for me. I wanted there to be more fire between Swan and Nynaeve in particular, because the way those two meet in the book is very memorable. If you don't remember, they meet in the Great Hunt on the traveling entourage from Faldara back to Tar Valon, and there's a whole like ships that they take, and the Amyrlin comes to train Nynaeve and Egwene together, take a turn at training them and how to channel the power, because Egwene has already started, and so she needs to keep training in order to not harm herself, and since Nynaeve is there, they train her too, and we learn about Nynaeve having a block and how her block works, which we still haven't learned in the show. I'm very surprised they haven't brought that up, because it seems kind of pivotal, unless they're not going to do it. And Nynaeve learns how to wrap the Amyrlin in air and pick her up, and I think she throws her across the room. She does the same thing to her that Swan does to Nynaeve, and it is very entertaining, and they both agree to let the other go, and it was a hoot. So I'm sorry that we didn't get a fun scene like that. Instead, we got kind of a relaxed, more casual scene where they're brought before the Amyrlin seat, and she seems like a normal person who just tells them in very compassionate way to, do their duty and try to help save the world. And I don't know, I just wanted Swan Santre to be more, of a busting, scary-eyed, tell it the way it is, overly emotive person. Like, she's actually has a very similar character to Nynaeve, which is funny because Moiraine and Nynaeve don't get along, but Moiraine and Swan get along great. And I don't know, I just would have appreciated seeing a little bit more fire between those two characters. And then they show the fealty with the Oath Rod as part of Moraine's penance, I guess, or penalty for, I guess, her being secretive as an Aes Sedai. I didn't understand I didn't understand this. Why are they mad that Moiraine has been out of the tower and not telling everyone her business? It seems like that is something Aes Sedai generally do. So unless everyone else is super cozy and she's the only one that's kind of off-putting, I don't understand why that's a crime. And it certainly seems like an over abuse of power to force someone to swear fealty to you on a magical object that binds you to their will forever for doing something like not being around as much as you want. Like, I just didn't understand this at all. So it was very weird writing. Like, you can kind of justify it as, well, we have to introduce the Oath Rod, but do we really need to understand the Oath Rod for many seasons? It's not really relevant for quite a long time. All you really have to know is that Aes Sedai can't lie and that they can't lie because of some object that they use. I don't even think we need to know that in the first season. So I just didn't get it. It was weird. Almost done here. I do have a lot of notes. Let's see. So then they exile her. They exile her from the tower, and this is her punishment. And again, this is like a weird punishment for, like, you haven't been around as much as we want. You're very secretive, so we're gonna punish you by sending you away forever, which is kind of strange. Okay, why? And then in addition to that, like, they make it seem like an unusual punishment. Excommunication is a pretty big deal, even if it's a temporary one where, the Amyrlin can call her back at any time. But it was unusual, but then it was also ritualized. Like, everyone knew what to do when she had been exiled and turned away from her. And it was like this ceremony where she was, forced out of the tower and the sisterhood until they decide they like her. I don't know. It didn't work for me. So I didn't love any of that. I really loved the giant cowl scarf cloak that Moiraine is seen wearing out of the tower in the streets of Tar Valon. That was a beautiful scarf. I would wear that, on a movie set. That looked amazing. So, doesn't quite balance out the lack of understanding with how Moiraine is being disciplined by White Tower law or custom or whatever rules that is that she's supposed to have broken. But it was a nice little bonus. And then we cut to, Moiraine dramatically riding her horse through the forest, which was very pretty. And then arriving at the hilltop where the very strange looking way gates, which I'm fine with, they look impressive. I'll say that for them. She arrives at the way gate, and then Loial shows up with his ancient lore knowledge of the way gate. We'll see if that makes sense to audiences who haven't read the books. And then all of the parties start arriving piecemeal, which to me just looked inefficient. Like, why are they all showing up at different times? This doesn't make any sense. Also, why is Loial with Egwene and Perrin? He didn't know them. He only knew Rand and Matt, but I guess maybe they were introduced to each other off screen. I mean, it seems reasonable that Moiraine would have, arranged all of this, just talked to Lan about making sure all of the things are, going to come together for her. But it just, I don't know, it seemed like a forced conflict and a forced solution to a problem that hadn't earned its tension. So the whole thing just felt a little bit forced. And then they announce the horses can't come with us. The horses cannot survive the ways. And I would say even more surprising than Matt not making it through the way gate is Lan saying goodbye to Mandarb. I think Lan is closer to Mandarb than he is to Nynaeve. He does not leave that horse's side for the entirety of the Wheel of Time. Mandarb is a staple in Lan's life, and I refuse to believe that he would not bring his horse with him through the ways. Also, I don't understand why horses can't survive the ways. So I didn't love that. I do recognize, however, this is probably a choice that was made by the producers. I have heard rumors that the horses they made filming difficult for a number of the actors, and probably trying to have horses in like a cave-like environment, which it seems they were changing the ways too would be problematic and not really necessary. So I can understand them just like getting rid of the horses, but if that was the case, why even ride them there? Why don't they just walk up this hill to where the Waygate is? We don't know how far away it is from the tower. It could be within walking distance. It is in the actual book, so I don't... It just seemed kind of dramatic to send away the horses. They can't come with us. We're going to send them off down the hill, fully bridled and saddled. Somebody will find them and take care of them. Like, okay, this is a little strange, but all right. And then we get the kind of like huddled around the campfire moment, which is a staple of hero's journey story arc, where they're all, aligning on what their goal is as a team, except we haven't really earned it because it's just Moiraine telling them what to do. None of the people who are there, other than, maybe a couple of them, really have a reason to be bought into this as much as she is. They all, only one of them can be the dragon, so why do the rest of them have to go? And Egwene does ask this question, but it feels kind of forced. I would rather someone said, like, well, can I just stay here? And if you are going to object to this mad scheme, why wouldn't they do it before they rode out to meet her on the hill? It just felt a little haphazard in terms of the logical progression of how characters would naturally come to decisions about things that are, so important to them, like, surviving or defeating the Dark One, or, I don't know, it was strange. And then we have the whole premise of, we can go to the Eye of the World, which they are equating with Shayol Ghul in this version of the story. That part is fine, because the Eye of the World as like a pool of Saidin is not something that's really that interesting, or should not really be that interesting to Moiraine. It's kind of a forced conclusion in the Eye of the World anyway. But I don't understand how they think they can prevent the last battle by fighting the Dark One now, unless the last battle doesn't exist in the prophecies in this version of the story, which we haven't seen the prophecies. We've only heard these little snippets of things that are not the same as they were in the book, but it's just difficult to piece together as a reader of the book on what is different in terms of the stakes of the story, and I just wish it was more clear, because it seems like there isn't really a prophecy other than the dragon is reborn and he will fight the Dark One, and then something about if anyone gets in his way, or her way, they can ruin it somehow. But it's so murky that I don't really feel like I have a good sense of what to worry about going into this final 2 episodes of the story. Like, they have a lot to do. Okay, so then Moiraine opens the ways, and she channels to do that rather than using an Avendesora leaf from the Tree of Life. It's okay if they cut the Tree of Life from the story, although I do like it. So channeling to get into the waves, kind of cool. Potentially problematic, depending on how they're going to use the ways in the future, because we know that Trollocs can go through the ways, those of us who have read the books. But and Patton Fane uses the ways in the next book, so I don't know if we're going to keep any of those plot lines. It makes it a little hard to say, since it seems like you need to have an Aes Sedai on your team, or at least somebody who can channel in order to use them. So I don't know. And we see the inside of the ways, and I don't love them. I don't love it's a cave with lightning. It's dark. It's like, okay, it's something. I'll have to see how non-book readers react to the ways. Maybe I will change my mind if they think it's really cool, not knowing, of course, what the ways look like in the books. It's not that the waves are like especially, dramatically gorgeous or anything in the books, but they were uniquely described as like this kind of white space with these bridges that span islands to islands and these stones on them. They were calm, almost eerily calm, like you're in some kind of a sound studio and everything is like white and whisper quiet. I would have preferred something like that to what they're actually giving us, with just kind of a dramatic location and some stage effects. But we'll see more of them in the next episode, so we'll see if that pays off. And then, but overall, the question I have for this chapter of A Wheel of Time is, what is the payoff going to be for the plot that they're setting up? Are we going to see some kind of consequence to all of the tower politics and focus on manipulative tactics to get people to do what you want, or to try to get them to do what you want? Is that going to play into the end of the story in a significant way? If it doesn't, I'm going to feel like these episodes were not a waste of time, but I definitely could have spent that time somewhere else more effectively. I do still want to withhold full judgment of the show, because how a show ends can tell you why it was written the way that it was for that particular telling of the story. So we still have 2 episodes. I'm going to watch those 2 episodes and then reflect backwards on what do I think the story was from beginning to end in this version of A Wheel of Time season 1. And then I'll have a better understanding of, okay, here were the things they did that really fit into that framework and made for a solid payoff. And then here are the things maybe where they missed the mark or didn't achieve that quite in the way that they were hoping, and where I might say, it might have been better to stick with some of the original source material if what you're doing differently doesn't actually improve on the experience. But I don't really know that yet. I'm just, like I said, have some reservations about this episode, the way it was executed. There were some really lovely things about it, but there were other things that just left me kind of scratching my head and wondering, what is the plot line of this story, and shouldn't it be focusing on some other things a bit more than this? So that's where I'm at right now. I would love everyone to, hit like, subscribe, let me know what you'd like me to comment on in the future, and see you next time.